Um, how about the Europeans? Let's start first. The German
Mm,
government collapsed, right? The
mm,
so-called the traffic light government that
mm.
hold them together, but now they are not holding together. What happened and what's going to happen? Explain to
Yeah.
my audience.
I mean, briefly, I mean, the Traffic Light Coalition came in with a very ambitious program to reorganize Germany and to take it in a more green direction. Um, and they then went ahead and plunged into Atlanticist policies of extreme confrontation with the Russians and growing hostility to China, which have proved economically disastrous and have undermined the entire policy, the entire objectives, domestic objectives of the coalition, because what they're now presiding over is a severe economic crisis in Germany. I mean, factories are closing. Volkswagen is talking about closing 3 of its factories. Other factories are closing. There's been a continuous industrial contraction in Germany, which has now been underway constantly for the last 3 years. Um,
Mhm.
and Germany is in a very, very difficult position economically, and people's living standards are falling, and people in Germany are worried, and the popularity of the coalition has collapsed. And the result is that the various parties in the coalition have been looking for ways to escape it because they sense that they are part of an enterprise, a traffic
Mhm.
light coalition government that has failed. So they all want to leave the coalition and do so in ways that they will blame each other. Now, what is fascinating is that, of course, the topic that they all chose to argue about and which led to the collapse of the coalition was the issue of funding for Ukraine. Germany has a budget crisis. It's got a 9 billion euro hole in its budget. There is a constitutional amendment. There is a constitutional provision in Germany which requires Germany to maintain a balanced budget over a certain time frame. So they've also, however, simultaneously made commitments through the G7 to provide more loan funding to Ukraine, significant loan funding. And in order to do that, they would have to enlarge the deficit. So the two of the parties of the coalition, the Social Democrats and the Greens, said to the finance minister, who comes from the third party, the Free Democrats, uh, relax this rule. Let us
Mhm.
borrow even more. Let us then use the money that we borrowed, run an even bigger deficit, and use that to support Ukraine. And he said no. He said, I'm not prepared to do that. I'm not prepared to provide funding to Ukraine in that way. I
Mhm.
absolutely support Ukraine. The best way to support Ukraine is by giving them more weapons, long range weapons and missiles, so they can strike at Russia instead. So that wasn't acceptable to the two other parties, the Social Democrats and the Greens, and it was the issue that they chose to end the coalition over. It's all theatre, it's performance politics. I mean, nobody really takes this all seriously. What it is the Free Democrats want to pose as the party of financial discipline
Mhm.
and budgetary rectitude, which is something that Germans care an awful lot about. The Social Democrats want to pose as the party of peace, and the Free Democrats can't, sorry, the Greens can't stand the Free Democrats anyway, because the Greens have a completely different objective, which is to press forward as quickly as possible towards, renewables and all of those things, but to do so without getting help from China, because China is the only country that can do that, and the Greens don't like China at the same time. So this is why this whole thing has fallen apart, because ultimately its whole policy direction since February 2022 has been a disaster. and they're all trying to find means to blame each other.
Yeah. By the way, when you bring it up that the Greens refuse to work with China to do the environmental friendly thing, it's actually reaffirmed China's belief. Many Chinese believe this whole thing, this environmental thing, is to throw it out there to limit China and other global South countries from developing. That's lots of people believe that's what it is. It has nothing to do with the environment. They just use that to stop, or slow down other countries from developing. That's
that is exactly true. They're completely right. They do want to move forward with various technologies, but they want to do that themselves. They don't want other countries like China, especially, doing it instead. And every day, I get sort of horrified comments. I was talking to somebody in the British car industry, but works for Volkswagen, about the horror about the fact that Chinese EVs are so good. I mean, this is absolutely terrifying thing. We can't possibly have these really, really good, very efficient, well-run EVs. He even said to me, they don't even catch fire. I mean, he thinks. I mean, I am not making that up. That is actually what he said.
That's a terrible thing. It doesn't catch fire.
That's a terrible thing. Exactly. Yeah.
And actually, a few years ago, there was an interview conducted by somebody interviewed someone in the government talking about this. And he actually flatly said, I would just predict that all those promises the Western country made about what they're going to achieve, they are going to backtrack them. And that's exactly what happened. Exactly. They promised they're going to, net zero. I mean, those kind of, air pollution or whatever the measurement they put in place by this year, by that year, they all backtrack them. So that's exactly what. So that person was correct from the government. Yeah.
The only country that has really moved forward successfully, and I'm going to say technologically and industrially, is China itself. And by the way, that will position China better in the end, because these are the technologies of the future. I mean, you're putting aside climate issue, electrification is a good thing, just to say.
Yeah. And then, solar panels, and that's another problem that people are saying, okay, China produced so many, solar panels, it's over capacity. Again, it doesn't make much sense. We should all celebrating, right? Or that now solar panel is much, much cheaper than it used to. We should all very happy celebrate. Yeah. But no, that's a problem. It's just incredible. Yeah. But what's going to happen in Germany next? Are they going to have an early election?
Yes, they're going to have early elections because of the structure of the German political system and the history of the German political system. We are more likely than not, going to end up with the Christian Democrats returning to power, led by Friedrich Merz. Merz is more of the same. I mean, he does have ideas about reviving the German economy, which basically are taking a more market-led, free market-led, tax-cutting approach, which, in my opinion, doesn't remotely address Germany's actual problems. He's very hostile to Russia. He's very hostile to China. The point I have made about Merz is that he's a throwback to the German politics of the 50s and early 60s, the time of Konrad Adenauer, when German policy at that time, was very, very much based upon a very free market approach to the German economy and extreme hostility to the Russians and the Chinese, and extreme anti-communism as well. A set of policies and a mindset which even many Germans are saying is completely out of date. So he's going to come in, he's going to become chancellor. The CDU is expected to get around 30 to 32% of the vote. It might get less, it might get a bit more. Mm-hmm. It's not enough for a majority. It's going to need a coalition partner. That might be the Free Democrats, but it's unlikely the Free Democrats will win enough votes to give the CDU a majority. the most likely outcome, because it's inconceivable to my mind that Mouts can agree a coalition with the Greens. I mean, the politics is so different that we're going to end up with a grand coalition with the Social Democrats again. So maybe the CDU, the SPD, and the Free Democrats coming together in a coalition with a government which basically ultimately is not going to be that different in its external policies to the current one. And it'll do things like cut taxes and deregulate and do those sort of things. But it'll be, as I put it in a recent program, it'll be a case of rearranging the deck chairs on the sinking ship. I mean, that's what it's going to be.
So they're not going to work with the Sarah Wagenknecht or AfD. They're not going to work with any of those sensible people.
No. There is a possibility. I mean, there's some polls that suggest that the AfD and Sarah Wagenknecht might get as many as a third of the seats in the forthcoming German parliament. But that's going to make the establishment parties even more determined to work together to keep these groups out. We will eventually see change in Germany, but it's going to take time. I'm afraid we have to go through the period of the Merz-led CDU government for that to happen. Lots of people in Germany can see that this whole course is wrong. But older people will continue to vote for the parties they know. They'll be very suspicious of these other parties. Germany is very slow to change political course. It's that kind of society. So I'm afraid we've still got at least 4 or 5 years before we start to see any major change in Germany. And I'm afraid the Germans are going to pay the price for that.
Okay.